Hey, tennis fans, you are listening to Watching Matchpoint Canada, Canada's premier tennis podcast. Hit the like and subscribe button below if you're watching on YouTube. Mike, we are fully in the thick of the clay court swing. Madrid Open happening, big surface change, and I mean, Roland Garros is just a few weeks away. It's incredible how quickly the tennis season feels like it's moving along.
We're about halfway through that clay court season already, which is remarkable. And I need a little time to get my clay court, grounding underneath me. It's no small feat, this surface changes that happen as a professional tennis player, even as an amateur tennis player. And I think back to when I was a kid, I grew up playing on both clay courts and hard courts. In fact, I played more on hard true than I did on hard courts because they had more of them at my local tennis club in Montreal. What about for you? What surface for you, before we dive in and what the pros are doing here, what surface for you were you, accustomed to playing on as a kid?
Yeah, I was really just accustomed to hard court. Grew up in Kingston, Ontario, and was at the Kingston Tennis Club, and that was 7 hard courts there. That was always, for the most part, my surface, apart from the, occasional trip to Ottawa. We would play on clay courts there, and it was always that first time, just a weird and unusual feeling, just getting your feet set and getting balanced. And the biggest challenge I always find is once you're moving one direction, very difficult if you're not used to it to kind of stop that momentum and get going the other way.
Sure.
A big investment I made in my tennis career the other year was investing in clay court shoes. That's it. It helped me a lot. Not just necessarily the sliding, but it's just a different grip, and especially indoor clay, which we have more of in Canada. You'll find more indoor clay court clubs. They certainly exist around the GTA. Being able to get those feet set and get your balance makes a world of difference. If you're in hard court shoes on a clay court, you can be slipping and sliding all over the place.
Yeah, I grew up on both. I was lucky because we actually had about 8 clay courts and only 4 hard courts. So it was tougher to book the hard courts actually at my club growing up. And I always played only in the summertime, in the spring and the fall. I didn't play indoor tennis growing up as a kid. Today I do here at 10XTO in Toronto, by the way, helping hook me up today for a nice recording spot. Toronto's premier indoor tennis courts. We know them well. We've been here many times over the years. They've been a huge supporter of the podcast, but I did not have this growing up. Now I'm playing at the Mimico Tennis Club in the summers, which is just a stone's throw from my front doors. Red clay, which is kind of cool, except it kind of wrecks the look on the shoes. But it is an adjustment, and I went many years without playing on the clay, and when I went back to it, it really threw me for a loop, that change of movement. But the older I get, the more I appreciate the clay courts. Just a little bit more time to get to the ball, a little more time to react to my opponent's serve. Everything seems to just be beneficial to me as my reaction time, I guess, slows as I get older. And I do love sliding into a nice forehand or backhand if I can time it well also. So, the surface changes, it seems like today for the pros, doesn't mean as much as what it used to be, because when I was growing up, it really seemed like you had your dirt ballers, you had your quote unquote clay court specialists. I remember Thomas Muster took a lot of flack back in the day in the, I want to say, early 90s when he became world number 1. Nobody believed he was the best tennis player on earth, but he played every single clay court tournament you could possibly find from January till November. The grass court season would be going, Muster would still be playing on clay. The hard court swing in North America would pick up in the summer. He'd still find a way to be playing these obscure clay court events and get all the points that he possibly could. And I feel like we don't see that as much anymore today. The line is being blurred between what's a clay court versus a hard court player, really.
Yeah, I think we're seeing way more all-surface players for the most part. You look at some of the South Americans who can now deliver results in Indian Wells and Miami and during the hard court swing. I have no issue with someone calling a player a clay court specialist. I just don't get why we're not fair about it. You never hear anyone call someone a hard court specialist. You never.
Nobody ever called Pete Sampras a fast court specialist, right?
Right. Yeah. So I don't know why we view it in such a different scope. But you're right. The players are more well-rounded.
It used to be like a derogatory term, it felt like.
I know.
Right? If you called someone a clay court specialist, as if they were one-dimensional, as if they weren't a real tennis player.
Yeah. It's
and I think
silly.
we forget,
go ahead.
sort of like age bias and just how things change over the years. But there used to be tons of clay court events back in the day. I feel like there's maybe less of them now throughout the whole season than there used to be, just like there used to be more grass court events as well.
Yep. Yep.
And I think it's also that bias being in North America that for us, hard courts are typically, as you mentioned in Kingston, what most kids grow up on here and in North America and the United States for sure as well. And so there's a little bit of that. We think that's the normal surface, whereas over in Europe, of course, it would be, the opposite for sure.
Yeah, maybe a touch of North American arrogance in regards to that. It's all what you're used to, right?
That's it. One player who does well on both surfaces certainly has excelled on clay, and we're not going to be seeing him for a while. And maybe that's where we should start chatting about the ATP Tour this week. And that's losing a current world number 2, Carlos Alcaraz, who is done for the clay court season after injuring himself recently, not being able to progress beyond his opening round match. What was that? Was that Barcelona last week? Was that? Yeah, Barcelona. What a big blow to tennis, really, overall, and the men's tennis landscape, which, let's be honest, it's been a two-pony kind of show for a while here, just weeks away from the next major where he would have been, I don't want to say the overwhelming favorite, but one of two that we would favor greatly for that title.
Yeah, look, whether you're in the Carlitos camp or the Jannik Sinner camp or another player is your favorite, this is sad for tennis, just not to have Carlos Alcaraz part of the second major of the season and finishing up the clay court swing. I think tennis is a more compelling, incredible product when Carlitos is playing. Especially would have been amazing to watch him play in Madrid with the backing of the Spanish crowd. Would have been incredible to see this, Sin-Carraz rivalry continue in full flight, because it's been pretty astonishing the way these two have been trading all these big time titles week after week. And it's crazy how things can change so quickly on a dime. If we were having a conversation in January, February, Carlos was on top of the tennis world. He was the best player on earth, world number 1, completed the career Grand Slam with a victory in Australia, looked, virtually unbeatable. And then he was shifting over to the clay. It was sort of like, who's going to stop Carlos? And wow, Jannik Sinner really changed that conversation quite quickly. He took back the number 1 ranking. He did that in his own merit. It wasn't because Carlos Alcaraz got injured. He captured the Sunshine Double, moves over to clay and wins Monte Carlo. He's been extraordinary post Australian Open with his stretch of tennis, and in the change of surfaces hasn't skipped a beat. Jannik Sinner is kind of taking over the tour, and now with Carlos gone, I mean, that opens obviously the question, who can possibly stop Jannik with Roland Garros less than a month away?
Absolutely. And Sinner, and it's no fault of, I guess it is a fault of his own, because he did miss time last year, and that was through his fault, his team's fault, in terms of having that doping suspension, no matter how you see it happening. But he has this segment of the season where he had nothing but gains to make. And it's super unfortunate for Carlitos because, as you mentioned, he started the season so well. We love seeing the best players healthy and out there competing. And it's just a good reminder of how brutal tennis can be, how physically demanding it can be, and how nothing is guaranteed. And so we hope to see him back in time for the grass court season. And that's going to be interesting as well, to come into grass without having what he's been accustomed to in recent years, which is having a super deep run, obviously, on clay, going the distance in most of the tournaments, certainly at Roland Garros, and then trying to double up at Wimbledon. Maybe the time off will freshen him up for the later portions of the season and allow him to be more effective in the late stages of 2026. Or maybe he comes back and Sinner has just completely run away with it and has built up so much momentum and so much confidence that it might be difficult to return to this 50-50 sort of split that we've seen over the last few years. Other than Alcaraz, to me, there's really nobody out there that is going to be able to push Sinner around whatsoever. He's got the Sunshine Double, hasn't slowed down on the surface change to clay. He's now become the third man to win 24 straight Masters 1000 matches in a row, along with Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic. Sure, we can offer up some names that may take a set off him in best of 5 when we get to Roland Garros, but does anyone truly believe that without Alcaraz around, it's going to be possible to beat this guy?
He's going to be an overwhelming favorite. It's going to be, that kind of that conversation like Sinner or the field. which is kind of crazy to think because this is not historically his best slam whatsoever. He had championship points last year, didn't get over the finish line against Carlos. I mean, I think the name, and this is kind of, for me, his biggest opportunity, his biggest ever window to secure the first slam, and he's probably the best player in tennis without a major. Can Sasha Zverev actually take another step? And whatever you feel about Alexander Zverev and off-court issues and his personality, he has the game to certainly go deep at slams. He's done that regularly. He's lost in finals. This would open, for me, his biggest window and his biggest chance for sure.
Yeah, and yet to me, I think it's just going to put more pressure on his shoulders, and he hasn't shown capable of being able to do that when it counts the most. And lately, to me, it seems like Sasha Zverev is the perennial semi-finalist, and he's doing it time and time again. He finished in the semis of both Indian Wells and Miami, and his first 2 tournaments on clay as well. He doesn't seem nearly close enough to the big moments or the big 2 players that we've started talking off the top of the podcast here to really be able to challenge them. And it's going to be interesting to me to see when it's all said and done, because he is older than Sinner and Alcaraz. Yeah. When he retires, it'll be curious to see where do we place him in terms of the overall greats or good players, very good players of tennis history. Is he going to be a Marcelo Rios type player who made slam finals or a slam final or 2, but couldn't get beyond that? I just don't see at this stage. I don't know if he's got the belief that he can do it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, and it might be something where he needs a shakeup from another player to somehow stun Jannik Sinner in an early round, which also feels unlikely. I mean, I'll throw out another name, and he kind of struggled with injury after the Australian Open, but he had Novak Djokovic on the ropes at the Australian Open, and he's really pushed up the rankings. Lorenzo Musetti, who I think certainly his best surface is clay, has this beautiful one-handed backhand, all-court game, variety, an immense skill set, and he's made pushes at the French Open before, and I think he's more mature now, more complete as a player. If he's healthy and fit, if he gets a favorable draw, is he someone who, I don't know if he wins, but is he making his first Grand Slam final perhaps? That could be another name maybe in the conversation.
See, I would take those odds over Sasha Zverev any day of the week, and that's not just because personally I'm not a huge Sasha Zverev fan, as anyone who's listened for a while certainly knows. How about a couple other names here who've done well on the clay season early on so far? Arthur Fils, who we've been pretty high on over the last couple of years, winning in Barcelona against Andrei Rublev. And also, how about American Ben Shelton, who took the title in Munich over Kaboli? Do either of those names, young players that we're going to be hearing about a ton over the next decade, do you think either one of them could make a deep run as we head into things in Paris?
Yeah, French Open, I'm higher on Fils, to be honest, than as much as I like Ben Shelton, how explosive he is. Fils, some of the tennis he showed in Barcelona. I mean, he hit Andrei Rublev off the court in that final, and I know Rublev is a bit volatile and has been up and down the past few years, but he looked phenomenal. He had a win over Tsitsipas, I think, in Miami, which was about 50 minutes. Again, not peak Tsitsipas, but still, Fils has so much explosive firepower from the back of the court, world-class forehand. He's super athletic, moves incredibly well, and I think clay is his best surface. And if he stays healthy, he's had issues with the back. Ben Shelton, I might need to see a bit more, particularly on the clay court surface, before I have him there.
Love both of those guys and agree with your analysis and the surface difference for sure. It was great to see Shelton hoist that clay court title. I think both these guys are going to do big things in the sport moving forward. I hope they can get to the point where they can start to nudge those top guys a little bit more and generate more of a conversation there. Like, when we switch over to the women's side, it's just so much fun having 4 or 5 really big players up there right now, kind of competing for it and competing for some of those majors, as we're going to discuss in a few minutes. And I don't know. I don't want to say I'm getting bored of it already, but we just had that 2, 3, 4 guy, domination. Well, 3 guy domination for so long on the ATP tour that I just like to see it a little bit more wide open, to be honest. That's what a return to what I grew up watching in the late 80s, early 90s, where there were multiple guys winning slams, and winning 6 slams in a career was a pretty big deal. Whereas now you got to hit at least double digits before anyone will pay attention, right?
Yeah, well, look, you got one guy who's at 6 right now, and Carlos, which is
Sure, but
crazy.
and rising quickly.
And rising, right? No, exactly. You're completely right. For me, I would love to see. I mean, I was a huge Big Four fan. I do want to see a couple more names in that conversation. As much as I love a great rivalry, I love the Federer-Rafa rivalry. I loved Novak-Rafa, Djokovic-Fed, etc. It's a little more fun entering a major where you feel like realistically 6 or 7 guys could win this thing.
If my kids were listening right now, they'd do this. But anyways, 6, 7.
Oh, God. Yeah, I know.
Do you get that from the tennis kids you coach? You probably do,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you would be surprised how often it comes up when maybe
so
we're counting rallies and whatnot. Anyway,
yeah. So annoying. Speaking of kids and the youth movement on the ATP Tour, I know there are a couple of names that you wanted to mention. Maybe not ones that we should expect anything huge from just yet. Although perhaps that's what it'll take, someone who's so young that they just don't know any difference to go out there and have a big result sooner than anticipated.
Yeah, look, I mean, everyone was talking about João Fonseca, I think, last year. He was the incredibly hyped teenager. But Spain's Rafael Jodar is surging incredibly fast, and it's been building for some time now. He won an ATP 250 right after Miami, beating some quality players. Then in Barcelona, he makes the semis. You know, he beats Cam Norrie in straight sets. He pushes Arthur Fils actually in that semi. Fils goes on to win the title. And now in Madrid, with the backing of the Spanish crowd, I mean, he took down Dimmenauer 3-1 in the second round. Really impressive result. And then he actually beat Fonseca, in which was a great matchup of 2 superstar teenagers. He beat him in 3 sets. And it just feels like another one of these, I guess, next-gen ATP Finals players who's on a rapid ascent. He has all the tools in his game. He has all the firepower. He's already top 40 right now, and he could realistically crack, I think, the top 30 by the end of this tournament if he keeps on rising. Very complete package, solid backhand, big time forehand. I think it's fun to have a Spanish Rafa who's particularly good on clay again. That's exciting. He doesn't have maybe the type of flair a Fonseca or certainly an Alcaraz does, but he's super rock solid, just 19 years old, and it looks like he's rapidly rising. A guy who certainly will be in the top 20, I think, quite soon, and I think he'll be knocking on the door of the top 10 next year. I wouldn't be surprised.
You know, there's a good reminder maybe to some of our listeners, viewers, and I know to myself as well, to pay more attention to the ATP Next Gen tournament at the end of the year. I always find I'm a little burnt out with my tennis by that point, and I don't have the bandwidth to kind of tune in. And it's, you know, it always kind of struck me as a bit of a bit gimmicky. So maybe I'm a bit too much of a tennis purist, but the more I think about it, because you see these new names and they're always coming along, and every year, you know, there's going to be some new ones that are going to try and make their mark. And if you pay attention to that ATP Next Gen tournament, it's a bit of a preview, because these names come up, and that's where they maybe first had that moment to pay attention as a professional to get into that little 8-man tournament.
Yeah, honestly, it's really interesting to look at the names even from last year, because actually Jodar in group stage played the fellow Spaniard Martin Landalucci, who was the guy who beat Sebastian Korda right after Korda took out Alcaraz and had that run in Miami. Like, all these guys,
and everyone was saying, well, how could Korda take out, you know, and then fall to, well, hey, listen, there's some skill there, there's some talent there for sure.
For sure. And I think we're seeing, maybe you talk about prospects in hockey or baseball. It seems like tennis prospects are figuring it out more quickly than ever now. So quickly, these guys are jumping into the top 100, top 50, and making a name for themselves promptly. So that's what's happening right now for sure.
And it's interesting. I wonder if tennis needs to do a better job to kind of promote these young draft picks, if you want to call them that, because in team sports, I'm a Habs fan, a Montreal Canadiens fan for those watching. There's my new phone case, Cole Caulfield, still alive and well in the playoffs as of right now in the NHL playoffs. But you pay attention who's in the pipeline because that's your team and who's the next wave coming up, and they've been drafted. They're going to play on that team eventually. There's no team like that in tennis. So these kids are just independent contractors coming along and having to forge their own path. It's not like there's that same pipeline where we're following them tied to our favorite team as we would in other sports like hockey, baseball, basketball, etc. So yeah, maybe it's on me. I gotta, pay more attention to that next gen tournament. One more name I want to mention who played in it last year, and this ties in now to some Canadian content because Felix Auger-Aliassime lost today to 6'4" Belgian Alexander. You're gonna have to help me. Is it blocks? Is it?
Yeah, it's just blocks with an X at the end.
Just blocks. And he was a major roadblock, I guess, for Felix because he took him out in straight sets. And again, someone who played in the ATP Next Gen tournament and who is clearly ready to, I think he's already the second-ranked Belgian male tennis player and on the cusp of the top 50. This, by far, his biggest win of his career. And we look at it through the Canadian lens. Of course, we're disappointed that Felix goes out before making the final 16 here in Madrid. But then you look at headlines everywhere else and it's like, oh, a Belgian tennis player has biggest win of career, and just how much it means on the other side of things for those supporting him. And maybe this is a bit of a coming out party for blocks. What do we take from this result for Felix?
Yeah, look, I would have liked a bit more from him at Madrid. He's played well here in the past, certainly. He wasn't that sharp in this match, and I felt like he played kind of a sloppy tiebreak towards the end of the first set, and blocks kind of seized control after that. And as much as you see more breaks of serve on clay, this was kind of one of those straightforward matches where you see a score 7-6, 6-3. There was one break of serve, and that happened in the second set. They both only had one break point opportunity, so it was kind of imperative. Take care of your serve, and when you're in when you're in a tiebreak, you have to be super rock solid and sharp. And Felix had a couple lapses with poor errors. Block seized the momentum, and I think he had an early break in the second set, and big time serve, big time game. And I think with the altitude of Madrid as well, it really plays up. Felix was outplayed in this match. It was different than the loss that I saw from Denis Shapovalov. I will say that. I don't feel like Felix is playing poor tennis right now. I want to see a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, Felix had more winners than the Belgian. He also had more errors. Of course, that was his downfall. First serve points only around 70% compared to blocks 80% plus, 81, 82%. So just not good enough to cut it, unfortunately, for Felix. We've said for years that Felix of the Canadian men seemed to be the most adept on the surface, that he gave us the biggest chance of going deep on clay. But I mean, I don't know, unless maybe you put a roof over the court. It seems like he hasn't had the breakthrough that we were hoping for on red clay.
Yeah, look, there will be a couple more opportunities. I'd like to see him get on some type of run again at the French. There's no reason he should. Yeah, and there's no reason he shouldn't be a guy who's making a quarterfinal of a French Open. It just doesn't make sense to me. So we'll see if it happens. Do we want
to mention Denis? I mean, Denis on clay. I don't know what no disrespect, but we don't anticipate and we don't expect that he's going to have. Although he has much earlier in his career, though, had Masters 1000 deep runs on clay. But it feels like that was a while ago, and I don't necessarily see that happening again.
No, I don't see it happening again either. The only reason I'll quickly mention it, and he lost to one of those next-gen guys from last year's finals, Nikolai Budkov-Jair, Norwegian player who's an impressive young player, teenager, just such a low-effort, sloppy, flat, poor, honestly abysmal performance from Denis Shapovalov. He lost this match 6-2, 6-1 in about 55 minutes. 0 breakpoint opportunities, got broken 4 times. Some of the crowd booed him as he walked off the court. They were that disappointed with the effort. And I just don't understand.
That's not the first time either, because when Denis isn't feeling it and his game's not clicking, he certainly gives off very poor body language. Yeah, he can whine and complain and sulk.
And this
with the best
this
of
was
them.
it. This was it, right? He complained. I think 2-3 games in, he's griping with the chair umpire about the surface quality, and he never lets it go, and he never resets mentally whatsoever. And the other guy's just on the other side, playing tennis. And Dennis is griping and frustrated and bickering. And the second set was just terrible. He was hitting moon balls at one point. It was just, I just felt like, look, if he was going to give such a disappointing performance, why did he go? Like, why? If he didn't want to play this particular tournament, why did he travel there? And maybe that's part of the mandatory system. You have to play a certain number of mandatory events, and he did it. But I just hope I see some more desire and drive the next time he's out there, because this week was really, really bad.
It's a head scratcher, and you want well, for me anyways, for my kids, I want them to find positive role models in sport, whether it be tennis or otherwise. And I just, if I was watching a Denis Shapovalov match with my kids, I would be, what are you going to take from that in terms of,
you don't know what you're going to get, right?
All I would be saying is like, hey, don't do that when you step out on the court. That's never okay, let alone for a professional tennis player. So, we've certainly been talking about this one over the years and hoping for that maturation process to happen. He's wonderful when he's on. He's got many positive qualities to him, of course, but boy, when things aren't going his way, he just seems to revert to that old Chapo.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching us at Matchpoint Canada. If you like our work, follow along, hit the subscribe button below.